and more recently, the third TAC position. So that's just a little bit of background on me. And what we're going to be talking about today is suicidal callers. Let's talk about it. A lot of times the cliche, people feel as if you can't talk about suicide, or if you do, it's going to make them want to do it. So I just wanted to cover some background on that. Hopefully by the end of this little training sesh, you'll feel more comfortable talking with first-party suicidal callers and have a few more skill sets to use. We'll go ahead and get started. First thing I want to go over is myths. One of the myths is that suicide peaks over the holidays. Given the hustle, bustle, and stress so many people feel around the holidays, it may seem as no surprise the myth persists that suicide spikes during the winter months. In fact, suicide does show some seasonal patterns, but peaks when they occur are usually in the spring. The spring seasonality pattern dates back to the 1800s. In 1995, a study of suicide rates around the world published in the journal Social Science and Medicine found that in the Northern Hemisphere, suicide spiked in May. This effect is strongest in agricultural nations and in temperate climates, where seasonal differences are more pronounced. Researchers aren't sure exactly why these seasonal patterns exist, but a leading theory holds that social life becomes more intense in the warmer months, and that puts extra stressors on people struggling with mental health. Another myth is putting the ideas in people's head, like I said in the beginning. And when someone seems depressed, their loved ones may fear asking if they're having suicidal thoughts and worrying it will put the actual idea in their head. This is not the case, however. Mental health professionals say if you're worried about someone, the best thing to do is to talk openly about it. Asking someone if they're having suicidal thoughts will not put those thoughts in their head. Talking about it, as hard as it is, may help that person break the tension and secrecy that feeds into suicidal behavior. And above all, talking helps that person get help. Another myth is that suicidal talk is just attention seeking. A common myth holds that people who talk about suicidal thoughts or people who self-injure are just crying out for attention, while the ones who never say a word are the ones to worry about. This is not true. Talking about dying or harming oneself is one of the major warning signs of a suicide attempt. And not everyone who wants to commit suicide will signal their intentions, of course, but just because someone is talking about suicide does mean that they are somehow safe. That's not saying that there are some people out there who do for attention seeking, but the ones who are real about it, talking about it, is a good sign. Another myth is most people leave a note. Upon hearing that someone has committed suicide, the immediate question is, did they leave a note? The idea that note writing is a key part of the suicide process makes sense to the non-suicidal mind, said psychologist Thomas Joyner of Florida State University, author of Myths About Suicide. But in actuality, studies showed that rates of note leaving are between 0 and 40%. Another myth is suicide is inevitable. Many people believe that a suicidal person will find a way to die no matter what. This argument is used by those opposed to suicide barriers on the Golden Gate Bridge, for example. More than 90% of people who commit suicide have diagnosable mental health problems, but the act of is very often the response of a stressed out, troubled person to a momentary crisis. So in my class, when I'm teaching that, I usually say that sentence again because the act of is very often the response of a stressed out, troubled person to a momentary crisis. Why I stress that is because us as 911 call takers, 911 dispatchers, we are dealing with that person in that moment of stress and crisis, and it's, I feel, our obligation to keep them on the line and safe until help can get there. People who attempt suicide and survive will not attempt suicide again. This is false. People who attempt suicide and survive will oftentimes make additional attempts. And young people who never think about suicide, they have their entire life ahead of them. And this is also false. Suicide is the third leading cause of death for young people between the age of 15 and 24. So just some quick facts. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. In 2017, over 47,000 people died by suicide. And in that same year, over 1 million attempts were made. The rate of suicide is highest in middle-aged white men. And men die by suicide 3.54 times more often than women. And on average, there are 129 suicide deaths in the U.S. every single day. So what are some warning signs? Research indicates a number of risk factors for suicide. Some of these common signs to look for are verbal suicide threats, such as you'd be better off without me, or maybe I won't be around. Expressions of hopelessness, previous suicide attempts, daring or risk-taking behavior, personality changes, depression, also giving away prized possessions or collectibles. I wanted to share this video of Mr. Gates. You can't hear.
The thousands that have died off the Golden Gate Bridge, I am on the 1%. So I was born on drugs and premature, and then I bounced around home to home. Nobody wanted to keep me because I was sick, and I got lucky. I landed in the home with Patrick and Deborah Hines. I had a great childhood. I thought, growing up, that everything's going to be great. And then at 17, it all came crashing down. You can imagine feeling that everyone around you is out to get you, trying to hurt you, and trying to kill you. And you believe that to be the truth. From the extreme paranoia, I exhibited symptoms of mania. From the mania came the hallucinations, both auditory and visual. And so with that and the bipolar disorder, I just was spiraling out of control. I vividly remember writing my suicide note. And people don't get it. Like, I thought I was a burden to everyone who loved me. Because that's what my brain told me, because that's how powerful your brain is. I got off the bus. I walked slowly down the walkway of the Golden Gate Bridge. People rode by me, drove by me, walked by me. And a woman approached me, and she said, "Will you take my picture?" She said thanks, and she walked away. In that moment, I just said, nobody cared. The reality was that everybody cared. Just couldn't see it. I ran forward, using my two hands. I catapulted myself in the free fall. What I'm about to say is the exact same thing that 19 Golden Gate Bridge jump survivors have also said. The millisecond my hands left the rail, it was an instant regret. And I remember thinking, no one's going to know that I didn't want to die. In 4 seconds, I fell 75 miles an hour, 25 stories, and I hit the water. I was in the most physical pain I had ever experienced. I have ever experienced. The Coast Guard was amazing. He was just so freaked out that I was alive that he just dove in and brought me on board. And I said, "Do you know how many people we pull out of this water that are already dead?" And I said, "No, and I want to know." The guy put his hand on my forehead and said, "Kid, you're a miracle." My father took one step into the hospital room, and I looked up at him and I said, "Dad, I'm sorry." He said, "No, Kevin, I'm sorry." And if you think about it, both of our immediate reactions were guilt. Felt that didn't belong to either of us. And even though I didn't die, it caused people a great deal of grief and pain. Just the day of my attempt still sits within them today. I asked my father if he still feared my death by suicide. He said, every time the phone goes off, his first inclination is Kevin alive. I had an impact on my dad. After the jump, the road to recovery was pretty long. I had 7 psych ward stays in the next 11 years. I still have all the symptoms I ever had. Mania, depression, psychosis, hallucinations, all that's still there. I just know how to cope with it, and I know how to beat it. I built a support network over these years of treatment so that I wouldn't be fighting this alone. So, like, it's okay not to be okay. It's not okay not to ask for someone to back you up. To the families who live with the loss or lost a loved one, they didn't do that to hurt you or destroy your life. They took their lives because they were struggling in a great deal of emotional and mental pain. Suicide, mental illness, and addiction are the only diseases that we blame the person for perpetually. But people die from suicide just like they die from any other organ disease. Today, no matter the pain I'm in, no matter the struggles I experience, I do believe that life is the greatest gift we've ever been given. And if you're suffering mentally, don't wait like I did, sitting in denial for so long. Because recovery happens. Living proof.
Okay. So in that video, you guys remember when Kevin says that the lady had stopped and asked him to take her picture, and it was at that moment he thought nobody cares. I've often wondered if that woman he mentioned would have asked, "How are you?" would he have even had second thought? So my thing is, as a 911 dispatcher, how do we keep the Kevins of the world from feeling like no one cares when we answer that call? Because we only have a few moments with them. And we do so by building a rapport, trust, and between you and your caller, and you do so by labeling emotions. You use active listening, and you establish your hook. And by hook, I mean what grabs your caller and what does your caller care about the most. So labeling emotions, when speaking to your caller, you sound upset or you seem very betrayed or at your wit's end. I hear sorrowfulness in your voice. It's easy to just use sad, mad type of emotions, but it goes so much deeper than that. In my book that I have created here for my dispatch center, I have a list of emotional labeling. Unfortunately, I don't have it uploaded to share with all you guys, but it uses words like inadequate, intimidated, threatened, helpless, burdened, pressured. It's a really nice little list of labeling emotions so that you can dig deeper into what the people or your person is feeling at that time. So active listening is basically ask open-ended questions, not yes or no's. Repeat the caller's last statement. So what I hear is, what I understand is that. Use I messages when you have the tendency to say you. They feel defensive. You'll want to use effective pauses. Summarize what was said by the suicidal caller and repeat. You'll want to try to avoid really, yeah, okay. Be empathetic, non-judgmental, and open-minded. You'll want to use a calming tone of voice. Be understanding and soft, and listen to understand and not to respond. And here's an example of that listening skills in 3, 2, 1.
Your father died. How did that make you feel?
Just kidding. Let's try that again.
Your father died. How did that make you feel?
I don't know. I was 9. It was like there was this distinction suddenly between you and the rest of the world. I looked around me. Life went on just like it did before. But it wasn't like it was before. My uncle helped even visit. He at least listened. And I thought, if I could light my own thoughts, I could fly to the moon, or at least Uranus. But if I couldn't do that, at least I could use my this as a pogo stick, and that might be a way of getting around.
What's that? Yes, that's good. Mm-hmm. Yes, well, I think you're making fine progress, Hunter. We'll talk later in group.
Yeah, that's a good example of not listening actively. So what are some good questions to ask your caller? Keep them on the line. Of course, after you establish a location, phone number, if they're willing to talk to you about all that, sometimes they don't want to give you the address, and so we're also scrambling to try and figure that out in the process of trying to come up with some type of dialogue to start to build a rapport with your caller. So I've made a list of questions. Again, I keep this as a reference for my dispatchers here to just grab, because I know that it can get crazy and sometimes this stuff just goes right out the window and you kind of just fly by the seat of your pants. So some questions right off top are you going to commit suicide? Do you have a plan for committing suicide? What are you planning to do? How long have you been planning this? How long have you been feeling this way? Have you ever thought about killing yourself before? And then dig deeper into that with when, what stopped you? Have you ever tried to kill yourself before? What happened? Have you been drinking or using drugs? And can you describe how you have played this out in your head? So some of these are yes and no, closed questions. Some of them are open. The more open ones are coming a little bit later. They want to focus on the specific situation that caused the person to feel suicidal. That's usually what they are focused on, so you want to focus on that as well. Talk openly about the finality of death and identify what is meaningful to the caller. And these are what you call the hooks. And once you have established a hook, which could be the person's family, pets, career, the kids, could be parents, siblings, friends, spouse, significant other, possessions, and you do so by asking questions to dig deep into your caller's hooks. And then once you have a hook in place, if you killed yourself, who would take care of blank? What about the hardships your loved ones will go through? What about your morals and religious and ethical reservations? How do you think your mother or father will deal with the fact that you killed yourself? You know if you killed yourself, you will never see blank grow up, graduate, get married, or have kids. You know, you've told me you've made some pretty important breakthroughs in your job. If you killed yourself, you'll never have that satisfaction again. You were telling me about, I just put in a hobby there. You're pretty proud of that hobby. What will happen to your hobby if you die? Or business. Say someone has created their own business. What would happen to the business? If their pet is what they cling to, if that's their hook, then what about your pet? Who will take care of your pet? And they will have to put your pet down. It's basically just kind of bulldozing through those tulips. You want to talk about it and get them to talk about it. Now, if you get through all those questions and they're willing to talk to you and stay on the line with you, you've already had your caller on the phone for 10, 15 minutes, hopefully, around that time, and that's plenty of time for someone to get there or be close by anyways. In our case here at our dispatch center, we also send the ambulance to be on standby to assist. Some more questions and open-ended questions and some more statements is once you're dead, you're not going to get another chance. As harsh as that sounds, it's talking about the finality of death. You want to make sure that they understand the finality of death. This isn't a game to where you get 3 lives. If you killed yourself to get back in so-and-so, all that's going to happen is that you'll be dead. We can't be sure of so-and-so's reaction. So-and-so may not care at all. So-and-so wins, and you're dead, and so-and-so gets to go on with their lives. I guess right now you want to get away from the hurt, but, you know, dying by whatever method is pretty painful. Let's talk about some other way to get the pain out of your life. And not everyone who attempts to kill themselves dies. You could end up in worse shape, paralyzed in severe pain, like our friend Kevin Gates. And what do you want to have happen? What would need to happen for you to feel better or feel like you could go on? And what do you think you could do that would not make it hurt so much? What has worked in the past? So again, people who are calling and saying that they want to kill themselves, my guess is they've been struggling for a pretty long time. I mean, even for them to reach out at some point. So what has worked in the past? What kept them safe in that moment? And maybe that's their hook too. When an attempt has been made, it is important to recognize the medical needs at that point. And does your PSAP have a suicidal caller protocol in place? I know what we do is we definitely send law enforcement because of scene safety issues. And we also send, like I said, the ambulance to be on standby. Sometimes they transport, but sometimes between the paging them out and prior to arriving on scene, they've already attempted, or someone has already made an attempt, and that's what we're sending them out for. So we move straight into ProQA through EMD, and after the address and phone number has been verified, this is if they've made an attempt. If they have not made an attempt, examples would be taking any pills yet, they haven't cut their wrist, they haven't been found hanging, and they're just calling to talk, then that's when you want to build your rapport, and we stay away from ProQA at that point. So with that being said, that kind of wraps up the first-party suicidal stuff. Do any of you guys have questions about that before we move on to just a little blip of chemical suicide? No questions? Okay. Chemical suicide. Have you ever heard of it? Has your department ever dealt with a chemical suicide situation? And if so, how did it go? Do you have a protocol in place? Do you treat this as a hazmat situation? This part goes pretty fast. It's pretty self-explanatory. Just a little background on it. Chemical suicide was introduced in the United States in 2008 and has continued to be on the rise. This method of suicide started in Japan in 2007, where they have seen over 2,000 cases. In Japan, websites advertised chemical suicide method as a way to die easily and beautifully, which was making people want to do it. Chemical suicide is also known as detergent suicide. It involves mixing common household chemicals containing acids and sulfur to create a deadly hydrogen sulfide gas, which is lethal if inhaled in a contained area such as a vehicle, closet, bathroom. I have a picture later on that shows a man in a manhole that decided to take his life there. And these types of calls should be handled as a hazmat situation. There's a picture of some of the chemicals that have been used. And then I found this little news blip on how chemical suicide went bad for a couple of first responders.
Breaking right now. Sky 5 is over Lowell. Earlier today, one person dead, 11 others hospitalized after an apparent chemical suicide.
News Center 5's John Atwater is live on the scene with new information we're just learning. John?
Well, JC, investigators say it's going to take hours now to contain this threat. Right now, hazmat crews are just behind us. They're down the block inside this apartment building, but you can see this neighborhood still shut down right now. This was such a dangerous situation today. When first responders arrived here, they found a man dead in his apartment, and then they had to be taken to the hospital.
Firefighters used hoses from their trucks to rinse off in the streets after investigators say they were exposed to deadly chemicals a man used to commit suicide. The hazmat call prompted by a well-being check in an apartment on Rock Street. Inside, noxious chemicals investigators believe the man used to kill himself, and at least 11 others were potentially exposed to those chemicals.
Obviously, the concern is for the residents and the first responders at this point that have been taken ill over this incident.
Police say the man may have been distraught over a relationship and decided to commit suicide by releasing those chemicals in his third-floor unit. It prompted a shutdown of this neighborhood as hazmat crews work to contain the threat.
It is our understanding, based on what we do know now, that this is not a long-term, long-acting situation, that people exposed to it, the worst is their immediate exposure.
Thankfully, those first responders and those other people taken to the hospital who live in that building, they are going to be okay. But as you can see just behind us here, this neighborhood still shut down at this hour, and it's not clear exactly what chemicals this man did release into his apartment. We're live in Lowell tonight. John Atwater, WCVB News Center 5.
Okay, so not too sure exactly how that original call came in, but as the 911 call takers, we can definitely do our best to try and prevent this. So as a 911 call taker, you can initiate an immediate intervention. A careful evaluation of any situation involving an unresponsive person in an enclosed space is critical for responder safety. The call taker needs to be alert to quickly determine if this reported situation presents a danger. It's very likely that when a call comes into the PSAP, the victim is already dead. At this point, you need to protect the first responders and your caller. You should ask the caller the following questions if chemical suicide is suspected. Is the person inside the vehicle unresponsive? So how many times have you taken a call, if you're a call taker, where you have a passed out subject in a vehicle? They didn't maybe stop to check, but he looked like he was passed out. I don't know if he's drunk. I don't know if he's sleeping, one of those things. So if you get one of those calls, a good question to ask would be, can you see a suicide note? Also remind them, do not open the vehicle to look. Here's that guy in the manhole I told you had found his way to take himself out there. Are there any warning signs around the vehicle or taped to the windows? Not all chemical suicide scenes will have warning notes. However, most people who want to kill themselves don't necessarily want to hurt anyone else. So in situations like chemical suicide, they have been known to place warnings on their windows to prevent anyone else being harmed. Here's some examples. Do not enter without protective gear. Looks like a suicide note there. To my friends, my work is done. Why work or why wait? I'm not sure exactly what that said. Another good question is, can you smell rotten eggs or sulfur? When you mix these together, it makes a very prominent smell of rotten eggs or sulfur. And some callers may even may smell it immediately and others may not. I've also been told the smell of burnt almonds. I haven't added it to my presentation, though. Oh, just kidding, I did. Does it smell like burnt almonds or a bitter smell? The smell of bitter almonds usually indicates the presence of hydrogen cyanide. Here's a scene, what it may look like in the vehicle.
I came up with one case that had Sarah May Birch, B-I-R-C-H. Let me try this. But
so indicators of chemical suicide, there may be empty household cleaning containers on the floorboard or seat, one or more large buckets to mix the solution in, or bowls that we saw in the other pictures. Vehicles' inside door handles may have been removed. This prevents the people from changing their mind. There may be a yellow, green, or white residue on the seats or on the dashboard. Duct tape over the air vents. Tools to mix the chemicals with will be present, and windows may be fogged with yellow or green residue.
You go ahead and give me her correct spelling.
And then I have a funny 911 call to share with you guys. It's a fake one off of Paradise PD, I believe. But it's just to kind of cheer you up after talking about suicidal stuff. Okay, looks like they removed it, so we're not going to watch it. Some contacts, references, and hotlines that I have. If you guys wanted to write those down. Okay. And then the video will be up for you guys to reference as well. And then if you have any questions or would like to email me, maybe get a copy of the book that I keep here for my dispatchers, you can send me an email, khs@jfcountyks.com, or you can call my dispatch center and ask for me at 785-863-2247. Any questions? Okay, we're going to go ahead and stop the recording, and it is available for you in the next few days.